chatting. I'm Karina, and my colleague and lovely friend Nick is also here with us. And we are pairing up today to talk to you about from strategy to implementation. He and I are very passionate about this topic, and we talk about it on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis about how do we actually make strategy lift outside of a document and into the world and the practice that we are doing every day. So making it much more actionable. So that's what we're going to be spending the next sort of hour about. We're going to try and leave some time at the end for questions. So if you've got those questions, pop them in the chat because our lovely host here, Janet, is going to be looking at those and synthesizing those as we go through as well. So any burning questions, put them in. I'd also love to acknowledge the country in which both Nick and I are on today. I'm coming from Gadigal land in Sydney. It's a bit of an overcast day here, but it's nice and warm and humid. And Nick is joining from Boorloo land in Perth as well. So, and I can see from the chat, we've got a beautiful spread of different people coming from different places. And I just thought I might mention today is, August 13. It's the anniversary of the Yirrkala bark petitions. And if you don't know about those, in 1963, the Lonyu people from Yirrkala County, our community up in Northwest Arnhem Land, presented the Australian Parliament with two petitions, one written in Yolngu Matha and the other in English. And the petition was kind of the beginning of the modern land rights movement for the Indigenous people of our country. So have a bit of a look into that. It's a really important moment in our history, and the artifacts themselves are beautiful. So have a bit of a Google of those. And I just wanted to remind us today about this moment. Okay, so what are we going to do today? Today, we're going to talk a bit about what actually keeps our strategies coming to life. What are the things that get in our way in organizations, the ways of working, the mindsets about how we think about strategy, and what are the things that we can actually do to move those into implementation and actually create strategy in action. So what does it mean to have those strategies and actions? How do we design them together? So that they can be implemented? What do we do to actually harness and galvanize all of our teams around those strategies so that they come into the day-to-day? And how do we sort of bring those things to life? So we're going to be focusing a little bit on kind of corporate therapy at the start, and then we'll get into what are the things that we can actually do about it at the end. And as you go along, if you hit some of these topics and you think, oh, I've got some great ideas about how we do it in our organization, again, pop those in the chat. We love to be kind of sharing our ideas as we go along. So I'm going to hand over to Nick. He's going to kick us off.
Thanks, Karina. And once again, thanks everybody for joining us. Bit of a warning ahead. This might be triggering for one or two of us on the call. We see some behaviors, we see some instances, we hear a lot of things repeatedly. So that's why we're playing this back today, to share it, to say to you all, you're not alone and it's not uncommon. I think many of us have do work either for, with, or in complex organizations of every flavor, from not-for-profit to education sector to commercial works. And as consultants that we are effectively these days, we're strategic designers, we see very consistent things across every sector and every industry. So some things are more pronounced than others, but largely the reason we wanted to play this back for you is that consistency and repeatability. So why we're here and what we're sharing today, we all know it rarely goes to plan. So we'll give you some advice on what we feel are the right ways to plan and the right ways to move that plan should things change, because day two can be very different from day one. Planning can sometimes outweigh execution, and there's a disproportionate or misallocated effort in doing that planning that results when reality, the rubber hits the road, the plan is stuck rigidly by and there's no room for, oh, now we know this, what should we do next? So we've got to be careful of the weighting there, and also whether planning is a way to drive you forward or a way to actually just build compliance and adherence. So I think, a plan should always be adaptive, but we'll get to that. Something you may have experienced in the past with strategy is it got shelved. You put an enormous amount of emotional effort and time into it, and then something big happens. something new and shiny, a technology comes steaming through, or the outcomes of a royal commission come steaming through and change all your effort and resources somewhere else. Best laid plans wind up in the desk. So I think we've experienced that. Sometimes, probably doesn't happen as much lately, we try to think, but they can still be created in a vacuum. Nobody else in the organization saw this coming. It's a big surprise and kind of gets in the way of what I'm doing today. So, which is why we talk about co-design, which we'll get to later. And a quick note about data. We all know the world is chaotic and rapidly moving, so it changes all the time. The amount of times we've heard people work with and reference old data and stick by it and not be prepared to move, even when they know new things. I would throw that one mainly at politicians, but hey, it happens in industry as well. So that's one thing to watch out for. So just quickly, a few things where we've seen and experienced strategy not be implemented or cause issues as it has been implemented. There's a series of common things that we regularly see, and these are just some of the top 5. There's many, many more, but we felt these were worth highlighting. Before I get to those, I drew these little post-its for Karina the other day because I seem to find myself drawing them a lot. And if I draw them a lot, again, that kind of substantiates the repeated patterns. Just to quickly explain, the one on the left, the wreckers, there will always be wreckers for best place strategy. It might be a department, it might be a particularly strong individual. It's likely a whole series of factors that will just always smash into that strategy as it's being formed, and more importantly, as it's being implemented. So expect the wreckers. The one in the middle is one that comes to light quite a lot, which is where we'll talk about orchestration and end-to-end services and experience. Oftentimes, strategy can inadvertently, or perhaps deliberately, fire your customer experience issues or your customer support needs downstream for the poor old front line to pick up. And there's a call center here. We've done several projects like this where decisions have been made, systems changed and implemented, and just somebody else has to deal with it somewhere else. That's not really lined up. And the third one, a bit more of an analogy, this one, but when we see poor experiences or poor services or strategy that doesn't prioritize getting people where they need to be, you're actually building a brick wall. You're building more friction between either your employees and their goals or your customers and your services. That's one thing to be really, really mindful of. And whilst one department or one tranche within the organization may have some very set goals about a particular thing, they can often conflict with other parts. And it actually all just cumulatively results in friction and slowing you down. So I hope that makes sense. So what keeps strategies coming to life? Our top 5 for today. It may change next week. An obvious one is flawed strategy and design. The strategy was put together in the first place in absence of quite a few things. There might be confusion. Even the best laid and best communicated pieces can conflict with others, and people might be confused about what they should be doing today. There can be duplication. We've experienced in larger organizations, different departments already doing their own things. The amount of times we've done stakeholder engagement or been out to try and create a stakeholder map of an ecosystem, we find that somebody out there somewhere is already doing a thing and they're not going to back off that. Or worse, you go, actually, we've been doing that for the last 2 years and everybody's surprised. So that's where the duplication happens. And there can be impracticalities. It's wonderful to say, we're going to go ahead and do this thing. The technology might be there. More often than not, the budget might not be there to pick up some parts of a strategy that looks good on paper, but cannot actually be implemented. It's just not viable for the organization or feasible. Organizational resistance, I'd wager, is a fairly common one. And this is because we're creatures of habit. And also, Jana and Steve at our last Lunch and Learn talked about efficiency over effectiveness, or rather the other way around, to get the effectiveness done right, and then you can look at efficiencies. When we seek efficiencies, we seek repeatability, we seek reduced friction. That can result in embedded processes and a very strong resistance to change. Once we get something humming, it's very hard to break it again, and that results in all kinds of stasis. Mainly that's caused by syrup and intent more so than actual cost and systems. So attitudes, you felt it. I'm not going to change. Not my job, sir. That's the kind of attitude that we experience. Constrained resources and conflicted resources is always a big one as well. putting money on one side to actually spend and get new things done or changed means a balancing act, and it means away. But the BAU demon can often take charge, and it can become compartmentalized. We're going to spend this over here, and it's not going to be spent over there, and that's just a challenge for every organization. It's the reality, but we need a strategic overview that makes sure that the budgets are being spent in the right place. Leadership shortcomings. This is not a firing upwards at any executive boards about poor leadership. It's more to the point that leadership have to balance so many conflicting interests, requests, demands on an hourly basis. So they can be absolutely stuck with overwhelm. They can be stuck with so many voices, trying to appease so many people. It can result in miscommunication. It can result in just so much noise. So it's very challenging for particularly hierarchical organizations, for leadership to be able to have the capacity to get it right. And the last one I'll just call to order for now is, because we'll return to it, is strategy seen as an activity, as a task, as a project, or done? That's it. Next. Now we'll go on to the other stuff, or back to the BAU. So that can be a one that results in it not happening. Couple of quick examples to bring it to life. 2 years of working with a fantastic organization with fantastic goals in defining a customer experience and more of a channel shift to accommodate more customers and up-to-date customer habits. Remember, I mentioned out-of-date data. This is a generalization of a quote, not a real one. But we've all heard it, I'm sure, because it wasn't the first time I've ever heard this. I know my customers. I've been in this business X years. I know what they need. If any of us knew what the world was going to be like 5 years ago, well, good on you for predicting it. But things change so much. Everything is changing so rapidly. What you knew yesterday might not always apply today. And the second quote is about replatforming. We've come across this numerous times where part of the organization is desperately calling for a change in customer service or a change in employee experience, and it's just all held up because all of the money is being sucked in to a platform migration or some other service or experience that needs replatforming or shifting. So it all sounds good. We agree with the strategy. We'll implement it in a couple of years' time when we've built all this stuff. Instead of letting the strategy guide the build of the stuff, it often happens in the wake. So just a couple of key, very real pieces that we come across. All right. So Karina, let's get off the stuff that doesn't work and let's get onto some stuff that does work.
Yes, thank you, Nick. So yes, there's a lot of things that set the conditions for us not being able to execute well on the strategy or not being executionable. So what can we do about this? What have we seen in organization that works really well? So in terms of setting the new conditions, things that we've seen that are really important is actually about having a shared understanding of the future. And this is across all levels of the organization in a way that's meaningful to people in different parts of that organization. So that everybody's in it together. They've all got that shared North Star that they're working towards. It's palpable. They can actually feel it and they can make that connection between their day-to-day job and how they're progressing towards this strategy that the organization has. It's one plan to rule them all. So we have a singular goal. We're not working in silos towards multiple goals that end up meaning if somebody's experiencing our service or our product, they get conflicts. They feel like they're dealing with multiple organizations, or either themselves, if we try and work with each other, we actually feel like we're working across those different organizations and we're not sharing what we're trying to do. So having that agreement together about this is where we're headed and we all know our role in it and how do we actually move forward in that together. It's cross-functional, and this is really important because strategy, actually for it to be really viable and feasible, needs to be created in a cross-functional way because lots and lots of different parts of the organizations will be delivering against it. And that's definitely something we see, that it's sort of created at the top, but doesn't actually represent the real reality of what's actually needing to take to execute it down below. So can we actually see everybody's role in it and make sure that those roles have the opportunity to both have a say in that strategy, but also can see themselves and it's able to be executed on. Speaking in new positive ways. Can we actually have common language? We've got lots of people working in agile and human-centered design and all sorts of different ways of working, but we all speak different languages across the organization. And sometimes we can be putting each other down, or they're the agile people, or they're the lean people, or they're those people. What's the language that works for all of us that actually helps us galvanize around this strategy? And the really important thing is actually making it tangible and visible so that everybody can see what they're working towards. And this is going beyond 250-page documents or even a one-page PowerPoint slide that's not really helping us execute, but a way that we can see ourselves. And we've seen organizations, put blueprints up on the wall and people going up and kind of seeing that, which is a bit more difficult now in our hybrid world. But what are the things that we can actually do so that people can visualize where we're actually going as an organization and see the tangible nature of what that looks like? And that doesn't have to be the individual pieces of work that are happening. It's the feeling of where we're headed and what we're trying to achieve. So there's some of the things that we've seen being really effective. A couple of examples of those, working with an organization that have been trying to they've got different parts of the organization who are very separate from the work that they're doing to try and deliver a new product service or a service that sits around a product. And for the first time in their organization, they could actually see one plan of how they were all, the supply chain people and the legal people and the finance people and the people kind of creating the actual product itself, coming together to actually deliver on this service. They built that strategy together, and what it means is that they're better able to have conversations about that strategy as well and know each other's place, a bit more of an understanding of what each other's do. So what that means is they're bringing in the right people at the right time when they need to tweak and shift and pivot in some of those areas with that strategy. And the other one is just actually involving people along the way. So, from the moment our requirements were first discussed to the finalization of the project, they worked hand in hand with staff to ensure we achieve the desired outcome. So this is about bringing the right people in to actually help develop that strategy so they have that buy-in and they, from the start, know where they're actually going to be going together. So that's all good. That's all good. But how do we design strategies that can actually be implemented to have some kind of outcome? So we proceed with caution here. This is a beautiful diagram of the strategy versus reality. I mean, I'm in 5-6 organizations in a week, and this is exactly what it looks like in most parts. We're in a room with we're people together, we've got some ideas about where we want to go, and it's like A to B, and everything's clean around us. And then we look outside all around that organization, and there are people not there because they're working from home, people across the world on a 24-hour time zone. We've got all sorts of activities in different parts of the organization happening. It's messy. So what do we actually do to make sure that there is a better representation? It's not the A to B, but it's also not the chaos. How do we bring those two things together? But I just love this diagram because it's so the reality. And so some of the things that we can do to design better strategies. And the first one absolutely is get the right people involved. And that is just not the leaders of the organization. It's the people who are operationalizing that strategy and representatives of them, because if it's not practical to implement, it will not happen. And so who are those right people that we need to get involved to represent their context, their challenges and their needs and their own version of what they understand the customer's needs into that strategy? Clarify and respect boundaries, leverage what's working and fix what isn't. So actually say, not everything's broken in every time we create a strategy. We don't need to start from scratch. A lot of times it's actually just a tweak. And so having that conversation about what you agree is actually working really well and should be just pushed on. But where are the areas we have different opportunities or more opportunities, or what's not working for us? Let's agreement on those and then work in just those areas rather than reinventing the wheel every time. Shared goals and measures. Silos are the name of our organization, and it's getting worse, particularly as people are working in teams, and I'm in virtual teams all the time. So we have micro teams. how do we actually get these shared goals and measures when everybody's working off in these different directions? And if we co-create that strategy together, we have a better opportunity of having representatives and champions of those that strategy who can filter down into the teams to represent what are those goals for those teams, and then how do we actually work together across those silos better, break down the team's chats channels and create pods and different areas that can be cutting across those silos. Decide on the deciding. Have a framework that will help you create better decisions throughout the organization based on that strategy. People need agency in large organizations to be able to make certain decisions against those guardrails. If you don't have that, it will end up being a very slow, bureaucratic command and control. But if you don't have guidelines around how you make those decisions based on the strategy, people will go off-piste into all sorts of areas. And they want that guidance. They want to be able to make good decisions. So how do we give them that as part of our strategy? And then the most important thing, strategy is not a full stop. It is not a project, as Nick said. It is an iterative process. And what we've been doing with many organizations is building strategy into their cycle of the work that they're doing so that it becomes more agile and responsive. And then they can de-risk what they're doing rather than it being a once a year set and forget. It's a way of working. Strategy is a way of working across the organization that helps them make sure that they are doing the right things at the right time for the environment that they're in. So just a couple of examples there. This is from an organization I worked with, a little while ago. We went in there to help them create a new way of looking at this problem space. And what we heard is this is Groundhog Day. This is our third attempt. And we're not shifting tack, even though we know what we need to do. So the knowledge was there, but they keep reforming the strategy in exactly the same way it was being done over the last 5 years. So, and no wonder not really getting anywhere with it because it's not representative of the context in the environment that's going on now. And we've learned through this work how to be responsive, not reactive, and bring the right people in when we need their brains and expertise. So this is another organization we've been working with in the healthcare space. Things are changing all of the time. There's new opportunities coming in. There's things that come into the environment that they need to react and respond to. But rather than just chasing their tails the whole time, they actually build time in every quarter to reflect on what's actually happening and enable themselves to be responsive and set themselves up to be even proactive in that space while leaving some space and time for the things that they absolutely must react to. But that's not their core job. And this is about the rhythm and the right people in the room to do that well. Okay, Nick, back to you. Follow directions.
It's a terrible road sign analogy, this one, but it's the best I could do. Because it's interesting. Whether we do follow directions or not is another thing. So the stream of our work, you'll hear us frequently mention the word orchestrate because that's what service design is, or designing an end-to-end service that delivers for customers and also helps orchestrate the organization from an end-to-end to deliver on that. We use the word so much, and those directions, some of this sounds absolutely 101, but we still try our best to help our clients, organizations we know, and share the wider love that this is still a new sport. Service design has been around for 15 to 20 years, and people still struggle with the concept, and they still struggle to be able to have this view. And just lately, the last 2 years, every time that I've been involved in a project, sat down and created a service framework, more of which we'll talk about next time, it's a new view for the organization. They've never really looked at themselves laterally. They've never looked at themselves through a customer life cycle, or they've never looked at themselves that way because, frankly, we still, because it's habitual, been doing it for 100 years or more, have these vertical silos, which everybody has accountability for, and their cost centers and their vertical staff. And it's so much harder to turn it sideways and have a look at the value that's created from end to end. So how can we sort of pick our way into orchestrating a bit better? Well, we have to contain the negativity, and by contain doesn't mean squish. It means expect it, accept it, and share that change, and share that it's difficult to move. It's difficult to move even a little bit sometimes, but listen to the voices and listen to why, and trying to help turn that negativity into opportunity, but just expect it and account for it, and you're going to have to deal with it at times. A piece that's not always easy, because strategy tends to provide direction, and we assume that people will take up that mantle and understand exactly what we meant by that direction, is giving out trust, responsibility, and ownership. Everyone owns it. And this is, again, getting back to this orchestration. Assign conductors. If there was more conductors in the world, you'll see we've done articles on this, the person at the front waving the baton. If there was more people like that able to be service stream leads, or whatever you want to call them, across organizations, they would be the ones actually accountable for linking up the various component parts of an organization and help it tweak and refine the value as it runs through over the life cycle of the customers. They've been around for a few years, but we still do not see very many service leads or service owners who are given the actual remit to have an impact on other departments, because there's territorial power or there's certain limited remit. But, if we can look at how we could do that and give more lateral service owners a bit more accountability for doing that, you'd make great shakes, and you'd be able to tweak this part of the system, and that downstream effect, which I said earlier, you can account for that and say, hey, if we're going to digitize this thing, well, we'll need to sort that customer support out down there, and somebody has to connect the two. Sounds logical again, but it rarely happens at the moment. Focus on the right things right now. This one's not easy, because we are in BAU land all the time. And when we have new initiatives and new things to chase, that's hard. But the hardest thing, we all know this, is what to stop doing. But how do we reduce that complexity? How do we remove the noise? Oftentimes when we do some of our more compact and niche strategic pieces of work, we try to achieve a plan on a page. And if anybody's coming out with more than 3 initiatives under each component part of that strategy, it's just way too much. Cognitively, we cannot deal with it. We've all got a shopping list of 100 things we need to do in the next day, week, or month, but really we need to focus down on the primaries and decide what those are. So you, as an implementer, how do you reduce the noise? How do you put the things to the side? How do you help people and support people and focus in what matters? Quick reflection on working in finance a few years back. They did it brilliantly, because what we did was we assigned different squads, and you can do this in a large organization where there are a lot of people, much more difficult for smaller organizations, I will admit. But we did manage to compartmentalize and say, hey, there's a BAU team who will deal with the everyday, because that cannot stop, but we'll put another team over here. Actually, it was a couple of squads to build the new, and we rotated people in and out, so that way people didn't get disgruntled about not being involved in the shiny, but also those who needed a break from the pressure of the build and the new could go back to the BAU and sort it. And that worked really, really well, and it moved us forward. When you don't do that is when things start to go wrong, and it doesn't get implemented, because you can imagine the opposite of what I just said. Shop it around, showcase and invite feedback, and listen. We hear a lot, you see it all over the headlines and Forbes and all the other magazines, a learning organization. Well, we say not just a learning organization, but a listening organization. It's one thing to learn from the outside. It's another to proactively listen, especially listen to your frontline who are down in the trenches, and actually take the things that are happening there on board and build them back into your strategy. The listening is such a difficult component. And oftentimes, again, from complex organizations, there's so many steps removed from what's happening that's hard to do. And it runs through the filters, it runs through the reports, it runs through the concatenation down to a one-pager. Here's the thing that's happening. How might you make your organizational walls much more permeable to listen? Your strategy's happening, things are changing. What do you now know? What are you listening to? And just a little footnote about determination more so than urgency. That those two can often fight. Urgency, we've got to get it done, we've got to get it done. Let's do it now. Well, I wish we were in control of time. Even Doctor Who wasn't. It's a thing. Time happens, and sometimes things play out as they play out. So we would suggest stick more with determination and sticking to the goal that you're trying to achieve, and monitor that as you go, through your measures that are giving you the noises and feedback that things are changing, much more so than the urgency. In fact, we've seen so many times, particularly on a recent project, that the urgency to shift a thing was resulting in significantly wrong outcomes, wrong systems, wrong processes, just for the sake of getting it done. It's great, but what does that do? It not only results in tech debt down the line, but it's actually resulting in people fatigue and people debt, because the things that were being solved were just actually doing the cannon and firing everything downstream that somebody somewhere was going to have to mop up. So just have a think about that determination and urgency balance. Okay, couple of just little stories again. These are coming out of projects. It's really a really interesting one that we did when I worked in, of all sectors, mining, which is a very interesting sector to be working in. But we had a disparate global team doing a multitude of very, very important work and really groundbreaking decarbonisation work, which was absolutely loving. It was fascinating. But by getting everybody in the room, it was the first time they had a shed of shared experiments. And it was a big surprise to everybody. Oh, you're doing this and you're doing that. Hey, so am I. Remember what we said earlier about duplication? And we managed to combine that together and get this series of very tight new business experiments to go out and explore. And those have resulted in some really significant changes to operations within the business, which have resulted in some really exciting things in terms of the value chain for them. So that was great. Having it visually on the board in front of everybody, you can argue over what matters most, but we actually just sized it. We just sized the numbers. And it's funny how you get agreement in a room when everybody suddenly sees the numbers and goes, okay, number one is number one, number two is number two. Okay, we're on the same page. And the second one is just a piece really getting back to the co-design. Things were taking between 12 months and 2 years to make giant significant systems changes, because it's just a slow plod implementing enterprise systems. By doing things rapidly and for the first time, by having the full plethora of people in a room for just a short design sprint, you're getting marketing there, you're getting operations, you're getting customer service, you're getting product owners in the room at the same time. In 5 days, we'd solved a lot of really gnarly problems, and things were ready to test. Conceptual experiences were ready to test. So those conceptual experiences were actually the base of the strategy. They were the operational things that were going to be done to change significantly the channel service that this company was running on. So that was a really exciting outcome.
Nick,
Again, get back to co-design.
and I'd love to add on that. That's something we're doing a lot with our partners and clients, is around small experiments to inform strategy. Because it's not until we test something that we really have an idea about whether it's the right thing to kind of put into the strategy. So we can do these rapid experiments that give us a better indication of this or that, this way or that way, which means that we know already at the end of those experiments that something that we're going to put in there is a bit more robust. And they are things that we're doing in kind of a matter of days or weeks rather than months or years.
I'm just going to pounce quickly on Herman's question now, which is an excellent one. What are your best tips to persuade leaders to turn the organization sideways? I wish I had a magic wand to do that, Herman. We persist all the time. Look, our best tips are what we've mentioned so far. I'd say there's two sides to this. Some of the design methodologies that we use in order to implement strategy are helpful, such as service frameworks, such as showing the organization, mapping it out, its end-to-end experience, and giving people for the first time a view, an actual tool that they can subscribe to and agree to, because it's a collective that puts it together. So it's a true, or as true as we know, representation of a business. Having that shared tool, and people can for the first time see themselves and say, oh, upstream of me, this happens. Downstream of me, if I do a thing, that happens. That's a really helpful artifact, but it has to be a living artifact. It has to be simple enough to understand, but detailed enough to do something about. And then the second piece is, as we said, creating a role, giving leaders, service leaders, an opportunity to have influence in other parts of the organization. So that might be a senior leader, or it might be someone such as a service lead who actually is given the remit to make changes across the vertical silos. But that would be one. Karina, any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that one of the things I've been seeing recently is actually talking to those leaders about how it can actually help de-risk the strategy and take the pressure off them to be experts in everything if they involve other people in the formation of that strategy. And Nick, you and I have seen that recently in some work that we've been doing where we were working with some quite senior risk people in the organization and exposing them to some of the thinking of their actual business customers, so the staff in their organization. They were so unaware of what was going on for them. And it was a real light bulb moment for them, initially quite confronting, but they said, actually, we can harness this and this is going to help us. They change our strategy to be something that's better. And so we slowly made introductions to these people and brought them into the fold so those people could build relationships together. And it wasn't a them and us. They became a new team in a way. And this is a very large organization with lots and lots of staff in it, but slowly built up those relationships and trust meant that they could inform each other. So my big one is just help them understand about this is about pressure relieving and de-risking.
Yeah, I'll just quickly take one more question because it's a really good one. It covers both Alexandra and Aaron, I hope. Experiments to inform a strategy. Every piece of work we do, we encourage and run experiments before the strategy is finalized. So I'll give you a quick schools one. We've done several schools in partnership with another strategic partner to help these schools work through what their future should look like. And one that really sticks with myself in particular is a very, very high-end school, very traditional. You can imagine all of the cultural artifacts holding them back, but they had an absolute new vision to break out into new things. So we encouraged them to think about the big changes they needed to make in terms of curriculum, in terms of physical investment in the campus, in terms of core activities, in terms of staff culture and training. And we had a whole series of experiments, had about 6 or 7 of them. And what we did was we created artifacts, we created prototypes, and we took it out to the community. And by the community, we mean parents, we mean kids, we mean older kids, younger kids, we mean stakeholders, the board. We took it to everybody. So that strategy was not some secret source that got dropped on everybody. It was taken out and shared as it was fun. The feedback was fascinating because the big investment, the primary investment, which we thought would work, was turned on its head 180 degrees. So we were able to not spend $1 million creating an entertainment precinct for parents who did not want to be there. So we totally rolled that back in and changed it into a whole investment in something else. So I would suggest pretty much everything we do involves these conceptual experiments, because the big question I put on the table to everybody is best laid plans. How do you know it's going to work? Unless you validate it, unless you test it, unless you save a great deal of money by trying it out with your ecosystem, your community, before you get it done, that's how you're going to know whether it's going to fly when it actually hits the road. So everything we do is experiment.
Yeah, and I'd love to add to that, Nick. The thing around, experiments can be seen as risky or uncertain or disrupts the status quo. I've got an example of an experiment that actually prevented disrupting the status quo too early. And that's the thing around, there was an organization that has some very specialist knowledge in that organization. And those people with the specialist knowledge were doing very general tasks. They were spread across the organization, and it wasn't a very effective and efficient way for their customers to get access to this very specialist knowledge. So in part of the strategy, through some research that we did, we came up with this idea of having sort of pods of these specializations who would be targeted. They were focused on sharing that specialist knowledge and not doing the other things. But some of the assumptions we had to test is actually those specialists liked doing some of the general things they were doing, that maybe, this would kind of cut them off the organization, prevent them from sharing that more broadly with other people. So we actually ran a 2-week pod, a couple of 2-week pods to see how that would work. We spun them up, got them working, and then kind of got them out at the other end. And one of the pods said, I never want to leave this pod. And the other pod said, I never want to be in a pod ever again. And we pulled apart why that was. And actually what's now happened today is the strategy is being kind of written up and executed as we go at the moment. One of those pods still exists. There are 3 new ones based on the criteria that worked around those pods. People couldn't wait to get into them. And the other ones are back to the work they were doing before. And so not only did it not disrupt the status quo by just really a finite amount of time that we did it, but it actually prevented us from really implementing something more broadly that wouldn't have worked. And it's already saved that organization time and money and effort, and made them more efficient because that thing just worked immediately. So tiny experiment. And then I'd love to move on to Gillian's question around tips for persuading organizations that there is valuable knowledge and data in the broader system that they have not previously considered. Oh, yes.
Every time.
This is the real challenge with insight being buried. Lots and lots of organizations have lots of data in different pockets, and it's almost impossible these days to get across them all. And this is where the orchestration comes in, to be able to harness and bring together what is known and really get it into an operational rhythm of how do we actually, and who is responsible for informing and bringing those insights into those various, particularly executive parts of the organization as well. And we've seen insights managers that are doing that. We've seen data managers that have the responsibility of do that. But really what I see works best is going out to those areas of the business that could benefit from that data, understanding how they work, and us injecting our insight knowledge into their way of working. So take it to them, not making them come to us. Nick, have you got any additional things
It's the nirvana, isn't it?
Isn't it? Isn't it?
Democratized data. The amount of times we've talked about that. When data is gathered, it's actually for everyone to understand and learn. It's not owned by a particular pocket here and there. I remember putting up a slide many years back showing Jack Ma's live screen of what exactly was happening on his platform, and it was like you could see it. It was like the NASA control center, but it was all of the data coming from the various parts of the organization. We all struggle to achieve that because it's oftentimes, you know, a researcher's role to go off and do this, and that's saved in SharePoint over there or buried in an intranet over there. It's very hard to make democratized data available to everybody so that they have a shared understanding and agreement of that data that's coming in. Probably some of the better examples I've seen is where, again, you've got people assigned to do this and they push out the key messages. They actually, you know, they're called change managers, funnily enough, but there's also other people who have that role. And they get hold of this. The data's pulled in, it's pulled into a hub, but instead of just being processed there and, you know, data actual insights come out and are shared. They are shared as hero stories, they're shared as short stories, they're provided as a great big hit list of what matters most to the company right now, but it's visible. Somebody, again, has to be given the remit to be allowed to do that, to pull it all together and to push it out. So yeah, that's a huge piece. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes, so let's just bring this baby home. Wrong way, go back. So how do we prevent things from going awry once they're in? I'm just going to share a little sort of theoretical piece with you, and I'll explain as it plays. Can you hear the audio there? No? Good. Okay, I can talk over the top of it. I can hear it. Right. What you're seeing here is what oftentimes we see happen, version 1. People set a strategy in place, and over time, that strategy doesn't move. They just forget it. And what do you think happens to the market and the customers and technology and the economy and everything? It changes. So nothing happens. And you're getting further and further away from reality. Version 2 that I'm drawing here is the step change, which is let's have a big strategic review every 3 to 5 years. And what do we think that results in? Massive amounts of friction. There's a huge shake-up to the organization every now and then. And there's collateral damage. People leave. It's just really hard to do the big bang changes every now and then. So the third version that I showed you there was what we consider probably optimal, which is what we've been talking about from the start, making strategy continuous. You know, little feedback loops, small bets, but actual learning that's absorbed back into the key components of the strategy that allow people to do things as they go. So how do we bring our future vision to life ongoing? Well, we have those continually iterative loops to become adaptive. Partners that I've worked with, strategy used to be a 3 to 5 year thing. We're lucky if we get 12 months out of it now. Whoever did a strategy in 2019 with 2020 on the horizon? Yeah, that one went out the window, didn't it? So, we have to do the continual loops. So we have to have people, again, who are out there, who are listening, who are monitoring, who are feeding back, and having these reflective sessions to say, hey, a thing has changed, or we've done a thing and we know this now. What are we going to do about it? That's very, very hard to do, but it's a lot less impact if you do it continually. We've already mentioned become a listening organization. Primary research right out at the front is an ongoing. It's not do the research, create a backlog of work and deliver that for the next few years. You've heard of dual track. Those of you who've been deep and agile, there's continuous discovery because things change. You feed that loop all the time. You learn things all the time when things change. So become a listening organization. Don't need to hammer that too much. Celebrate change. If things have moved, sometimes people can be a bit disgruntled that the old ways are gone, but goodness me, sometimes we have to embrace the new. Can you imagine if we still did some activities in the same way? It's great that Teams has replaced half of our email content and backlog, so we have to celebrate change and say, look, we did a thing. We have to be good in calling out it didn't work, or we did a thing and guess what happened? Look, let's learn from that and move forward. So let's celebrate that change, not create more friction or resistance, or more of that magnetic draw back to the BAU, which is really, really dangerous. A permanent way of working. We're empowering everybody to think strategically and say, hey, here's the thing. It's not a separate thing from our operational plan, from our execution, from our daily stand-ups. It drives it all. It's there, it's living, it's breathing, it's guiding right from the top. It's a permanent way of working and thinking. And ultimately, once we start to follow this, once we start to learn the things, we have the metrics in place. We need a measure for most things to be able to say this was the starting point and this was the end point. What happened in between? How did something change? How did it vary up, down? Do we persist? Do we perish it because it didn't work, which is hard to do sometimes, but sometimes you've got to get rid of a thing? Or more likely, do we pivot a little now that we've learned a little? How do we move and then follow that line? We've seen it with digital strategies. We've seen it particularly in the product space. Just because you're obsessed about a feature, that might be great, and you persist and you spend hundreds of thousands on that thing and bring it to life, and then nobody uses it. Who knew? Sometimes you have to actually write that off and move forward, and that's a big piece. So once we can start doing that, we can actually use that data to move us forward, and that's something that we'll be talking about in the next session. Really, is how to sort of evaluate and say, how do we assign a number to the thing that we're doing, and then revisit it in a couple of sprints time and say, all right, what's changed here? Are we getting any better or worse? And by assigning those numbers and those hotspots, you can really quickly begin to see what's having an impact, what's causing tensions or frictions further down in the value chain, or what we need to do something about maybe down the track. And it's not so important right now. We're on top of that one. So we'll get into that next time. Let's talk about, just as a hero one to bring it home. Most people have heard of Netflix, I would hope by now, and a lot of us have heard of the story. But it is a great example of strategy that has pivoted over time, and they've listened and they've learned and they've been patient. But the core mission of where they're going is absolutely spot on and always has been. It's not been to, like Blockbuster, draw in people to find the entertainment and take it home to use it. It's been to deliver the entertainment to people where they are. Now, back in the day when they started out, they knew that they were not going to be able to stream that. The internet was in its early days. Bandwidth was the fun times with the modem. They were never going to deliver movie size terabytes of data over that infrastructure because it didn't exist. So they started with the DVD, but it still held true. I will send you a thing. They did an experiment. They chucked it in the post to see if it would turn up and break. It didn't. Hey, we can do this. We can send people stuff and they can return it by post. So they stuck to that. And then as things evolved, they moved. They became a streaming company. They became the streaming company. And of course, what happened next? All of the content originators pounced back on that, bought all their rights back and said, hang on, we can do the thing too. As cloud became so scalable that everybody could do it. And now as consumers are stuck in this plethora of choice where I have to subscribe to 14 different subscription services to do the thing. Did Netflix die, stand still? No. They knew their mission is still to deliver this, be a distribution service for entertainment. So they started becoming a content maker. And look how they're performing today. They might have been knocked for it initially, and some of the bombs have been bombs, but some of the stuff has been amazing. Apple is still struggling. I saw just last week, Apple is still struggling to turn a profit from their version of content production, but Netflix are going great guns. They've managed to get that up to speed. So you can see how they've stuck by their core of who they are, but they have changed what they're doing, their core activities, and they've delivered them as they've gone. Is that a fair lens on the story, Karina?
I think that's a great lens, Nick. So they're a real, success story about this iterative approach to strategy, and keep moving forward against that mission statement. It's to entertain the world. What does that mean this year? What does that mean next year?
100%. And that's it.
That's us.
Thank you so much for persisting with us. A few minutes over, but we're within. We contain the questions within. So, Jana, did you spy any other particular pieces we would like to address, or has anybody got any time to ask anything?
Any other questions?
We have a few minutes if people have some questions they want to ask. So that's you can do that, or you can go back to making your strategies happen.
And if you, Nick and I are very passionate about this particular area and love talking about it. So if you want to reach out, please do. We're happy to kind of jam on different ideas of how to kind of make sure organizations are being more adaptive in their approach to strategy. And we love hearing thoughts from other people about what you're doing as well. So yeah, always reach out to us, and we can set up time to chat.
We have 100 more examples, and depending on the maturity of the organization, this may be absolutely 101 to you. But it's funny, we go into the most mature, most capable organizations and still find a great deal of what we've spoken about today. So we know that it's hard, and that's why we're there, trying to help and trying to share these learnings to help tell everybody they're not alone. It's not unusual, and there are ways to influence and make this better for everybody. So yeah, it can be done.
Yep.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day and your week, and your lunch, and we'll see you next time.
Good luck with the rest of FY25. Thanks, everybody.